Hello. This morning I'm standing outside the main entrance to the UN building here in Geneva, Switzerland, and we're looking this week at number 9, Trial, Tribulations and Lists, for our series on Ezra and Nehemiah. I can't think of a better place to be talking about trial, tribulation and lists than the United Nations. Have plenty of lists, plenty of documents, and there's always trials and there's always tribulations from the nations who are supposedly working together, but all too often arguing among themselves. I want to take us into some of those quotes to start with. Sometimes our stop doing list needs to be bigger than our to-do list, says Patty Dye. I think that's a significant statement, because all too often when we think about all the things we should be doing, it's all the things we shouldn't be doing that probably are even more important. And of course this week we're taken into Ezra chapter 1, the items which are returned that had been stolen from God's temple by Nebuchadnezzar being returned. And in Daniel 2 it talks about that victory, and in Daniel 5 you have Belshazzar's feast, when those items that had been taken away to Babylon from the temple were being used for this drunken party. And there again in Ezra 6 and Ezra 8 you have the details of all those people coming back. You have long lists of the people, the families, the descendants who actually did return, which of course, as I've said before, were not that many. But as they went back, they were all listed. Why? For us today, it's not the really significant point to have all this list of all these different people. The really significant thing was for them back then that you had all those lists, because it was important to establish where people were, where they came from, who came back, who was entitled to what, who was living where, which part of the land belonged to who, and so on. So it was kind of partly a land record to have all the lists of the names. In terms of all the items, those lists were to show that these things did come back and were part of the treasury of the temple and so on. When it comes to the trials and tribulations, well, that's something else. It's all about the opposition that we've seen as well before to the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, the problems that they had in dealing with the people around the various other nations. We have some people who are mentioned, Tobias, Sanballat and so on. But what I want to focus on is the fact that they did come back, even though they had all these problems, even though some of the material for us today maybe not so particularly relevant. The main thing is that they did return, and they were trying to re-establish this presence where God had intended them to dwell. God said way back to Abraham, I'm giving you and your descendants this land, and for everybody after that, to Jacob, to all those descendants after, to Isaac, everybody, he's saying, I'm giving you this land, and this is where you're supposed to live. And that's why he wanted them to go back, to be a representative people in that particular land, to let everybody else know. It was to bring all the nations of the world to them so they might know the truth about God. And what better place to think about that than here at the UN? Thinking about how the nations should be working together, should be looking for peace, not being nationalistic and not always talking about sovereignty and our national pride and all the rest of it, but truly thinking about how we work together as a global nation, particularly, I would want to say, dedicated to the truth about God. Wouldn't that be wonderful if that could be arranged, if that could be affected by what we do? My time here at the UN, when I was representing the church here at the UN, here in Geneva and also in New York for 8 years. That was a wonderful time of trying to speak well of God in these kinds of places. We can do that wherever we are, and I would encourage you to do just that.